If you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a thirst for some level of like Japanese game news and Japanese game culture and things like that, right? We've had Bowl of Lentils on the show to talk about that, Cargadin and Filler in regards to like fan translations. And all that stuff is like really awesome. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of the people I've brought on and and myself included, have this kind of like hands-off approach to these topics. And a big part of this is, the language barrier and then also like a cultural barrier and to some extent, even just a physical barrier between, the countries that we exist in. That's why I'm really excited to have today the editor-in-chief from Automaton West, which if you don't know, Automaton is a Japanese news publication in Japan, and I've been following their Western branch for the last like half decade or so now. They're in a very unique position, I feel like, of being an English language publication based directly out of Japan and also being a part of a Japanese arm, so they have access to resources that I think a lot of other English language publications that focus on Japanese news don't have. I really love this website, and it's like become my number one trusted source of information when it comes to this stuff. So I was incredibly surprised when Amber Vještica, I hope I said that right, agreed to come on today's show and talk about, what is the goal of Automaton Media and Automaton West, and then also kind of go over the strengths they have as a publication based out of Japan and also the challenges that come with that as well. And even getting down to like how they choose what individual news stories they decide to localize. Well, I'm a little curious about your background, if you'd be open to talking about it, because I feel like you could correct me if I'm wrong on this. I feel like you're in somewhat of a unique position where, you are working with a Japanese gaming media outlet as like a Western branch of that. And I can't think of too many other companies that or publications that have done that. So I'm kind of curious, do you view yourself as a unique position? And kind of what do you think kind of led you to that position?
I definitely agree about it being a unique position because, as far as I know, at this moment, there is like there is no other existing publication that is headquartered in Japan and like actively distributing news to the Western English speaking world. So yeah, very unique. So as for how I ended up here, well, I joined Automaton West in the spring of 2023. So by this time, it was already active for a few years. Um, and the site up until that point, its legacy was created by the person before me. So basically, when I joined Automaton West at that point, it was actually I had no ties or prior experience in the industry whatsoever. So prior to that, I was like a real-time interpreter for Japanese engineers, so like completely different ballgame. But on a personal level, like obviously, I've always been very immersed in like Japanese content and very online in Japanese spaces. So and for some reason, I always ended up having super niche interests. So when you like niche stuff, your destiny is just to have to dig for information and translate it on your own and like
Yeah.
desperately look for stuff that you need. So in that sense, since I was doing that privately, my like connection with Automaton West was actually very natural. So it's kind of like continuing just an extension of what I've been doing, but for the site and for an audience. So yeah, that's like one side of it. And obviously like um my education allowed me to do so because like I majored in Japanese language and literature. So being like proficient in the language is was a really important thing because to get like the Japanese side to trust you and to be able to entrust you with their precious site. So yeah, and obviously like having a passion for what you're talking about, for what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious because your bio on your website lists that, when you were a kid, you were into like Duke Nukem and Wolfenstein. And that's something I can totally relate to because my dad was super into like Quake and Doom.
Yeah.
And it's interesting the journey people go on to get into these more like niche interests. So I'm curious when you say like obscure Japanese video games and internet culture, a kind of how did you get to where you were, and also like what exactly does that mean to you? Like what would you kind of categorize in that space?
Yeah, so as you've mentioned, like before I even knew like what games were, I was playing just like whatever I had installed on my computer, what my dad showed me. But then, as I think first actually I got into anime. That was like my pipeline down into the Japanese content rabbit hole, and then I discovered like I think oh yeah actually it was also artwork was a um big factor for me because I used to do my own art stuff, and I loved like Japanese artists, so I used to like seek them out and translate their posts and stuff like that. So, and obviously that translated also into games. I remember being like in middle school and becoming obsessed with the Toho series, which is
Oh, really?
yeah,
Yeah.
which is like it stayed with me like ever since. So if I'm not playing the games, I'm listening to the music. If I'm not listening to music, I'm like drawing fan art. So it's like it's been like with me like for the biggest portion of my life. And I think the
I
Toho's
think Toho is interesting because I said it's a culture more than a game in some ways, I
yeah,
feel
and I
like.
think that's
So
precisely what pulled me in so deep. And like so when you want to interact with something so Japanese and so like it is like obviously it's very popular in the West, but it is niche if you're looking at games and at mainstream games from a higher level. So yeah, that was like that was a big thing I think.
I am curious because I haven't really talked much about like, I don't know really where you're from or anything like that. When you were in middle school, were you in Japan or were you in a different country or?
Oh no, so actually I come from the Balkan country called Serbia, and I hadn't been to Japan for basically until I moved here to work. Um, I studied the whole time in Belgrade, and I moved basically the when I got my job. So that was like my first time living in Japan and working in Japan. So yeah, it was a big change.
Was there any community for like things like Toho in Serbia or anything like that or?
Oh, not at all. Like not zero. I mean, obviously there are people who love anime and stuff, but
Yeah.
like having like real life friends who like the same stuff, like slim chances.
So did that passion drive you to eventually move to Japan, or was it a greater appreciation for Japan beyond just like the media and things like that?
I
Or just
mean,
opportunity as well? I don't know
yeah,
for sure.
like actually, like originally, I didn't have this like big passion to actually move to Japan, but it happened like I got interested in the idea of working for Automaton obviously because it felt like something that would come naturally to me and something that I would enjoy work like doing. So that was kind of like a byproduct, I guess. I mean, as Japanese language was my major, I was kind of prepared that at some point it might mean actually being coming to this side and working here. But yeah, I think it's like that overall like interest in Japanese culture ended up kind of spiraling into where I am now.
So was so I don't really know a lot about why Automaton Media decided to expand to the West. Do you have a lot of insight on like what the original decision was to do that? I don't know of many Japanese publications with an English branch.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I wasn't there when it happened, but basically, so the Automaton Japan is at this point a site with a really long history, and it's like it's one of the major sites in Japan with like a very like kind of prestigious, good reputation among core gamers, and it's existed I'm if I recall correctly, 2014, and then around 2021, there was the decision to make Automaton West, but the the basic like kind of concept behind it was since Automaton Japan was created with the basic um, goal of importing information about Western games into Japan and like localizing that and delivering it to Japanese gamers. Basically, the idea was, why don't we do the opposite? Like, they saw the potential in like importing, exporting information about Japanese games to Western people. So that was like the base idea of it. But then at that point, there were already some sites, Western ones, that were doing a very good job of introducing information about Japanese games. Like, I don't know, you have Gematsu and Silicon Era, who were like quite focused on Japanese stuff. So that part of things was already, that demand was already kind of fulfilled. So when they looked further, like, what can we do, like, that's unique to us, since we are actually situated in Japan and have like Japanese staff, um, may it would be like, our advantage is that we can provide content that's more cultural, that takes a deeper dig into things, that kind of even goes into like things like Japanese internet culture, gamer culture, like memes. What are people angry about? What are people happy about? Like, just giving it a more cultural kind of coloring compared to what other sites are doing.
Yeah, I think the way I've always tried to simplify it to people is that like you guys are Japanese news about games, where I feel like websites like Siliconera are websites about Japanese games. Does that make sense? Like the words get mixed up a little bit there, but I
That
think
makes a lot of sense, and I think I'm gonna steal that from now on, because it's yeah, I think that's precisely it, because I think we kind of, what sets us apart is that this approach to how we select our content and how we the
yeah.
yeah.
Are you familiar with the old website called Andrea Sang?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Andrea Sang? I
No,
don't know
I'm
if I'm
not.
pronouncing it right. Yeah, so they were like in the late 2000s. They did a very similar thing that you guys were doing. I don't know the team behind that, where they were located or anything like that. And they shut down in probably like 2010 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, there's this big gap in my media diet of waiting for like a publication that would talk about Japanese games or Japanese news
uh,
about games. So when I found you guys, I was like super excited. It's like finally, it's like half a decade without it, because otherwise I'm going to a lot of Japanese publications like 4Gamer, Inside Games, things like that,
yeah.
and just like machine translating it. I have like a baby level of Japanese, but not enough to sit down and read an article. um and so like you guys have you guys have saved me in a lot of ways. So because it's difficult to navigate that space when you like there's so much on my side cultural uncertainty, right?
Yeah,
And then also the language gap as well. So
I'm
um
happy to hear that, because that is precisely what our goal is. Just targeting these people who love Japanese like stuff and want to know more about it, but are just simply like blocked by this language barrier, and by basically kind of the internet space is being very divided. Like, if you aren't like really trying to dig deep into it, you can't like stumble upon information you need so easily. So yeah, that is kind of what we're going for.
yeah. Um, so I am curious because you mentioned the thing I was not aware of was automaton, or sorry, I accidentally pronounced you guys as automaton for a long time. It's automaton. So if I slip up, I apologize.
It's okay.
But, oh, so I was not aware the fact that the Japanese side was focused on Western news about games. You said that that was the case, right? Initially.
Yeah, that was like
Yeah.
the initial idea behind it. Obviously, that doesn't mean that it's exclusive on Western games,
Mhm.
and in fact, it does a lot of very detailed reporting on the Japanese industry and Japanese games as well. So it's not at all like actually the Automaton West is a lot more focused on exclusively Japanese games than the Japanese one is on Western games. So yeah, both are there. I would say.
So I'm kind of curious because when you say that, in some ways it seems like there is like an interesting overlap between your audiences between both sides of being like kind of curious about something outside of your own country, but at the same time they're kind of polar opposites at the same time. would
Yeah.
would you say there's any overlap between those audiences, and what would you say like is the biggest difference between those two sets of audiences?
That, that is a good question. I mean, the thing is, like, people who love Japanese games, I think a lot of people who read Automaton West also like read Automaton Japan, probably, or at least try
Mm.
to.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think there is very little difference, probably, because it's kind of the same concept. So you have Japanese people who love games and want to know more about them, whether they be domestic or Western ones. And it's kind of the same thing with us, I think. And the Automaton Japan is like, it has this reputation of like being very detailed and like introducing Japanese users to things they wouldn't find out normally on their own. So I think in that sense, we are kind of doing basically the same thing in kind of an opposite way and like satiating the same needs from the readers.
gotcha. I would be a little curious to know a little bit about like what the process is like in terms of creating articles and choosing topics. I would like to ask you some questions about a very specific article, if that's okay. And if you don't remember, that's perfectly fine. I think I sent you a link to it beforehand, but
Oh yeah, you did. Yeah.
yeah, it's the
Um,
Bourbon Metaverse. It's a Japanese snack company for the people who are listening, and they made a little virtual metaverse. I'm curious, first and foremost, that seems very specific. How did that end up in your hands? Was it like delivered by a press release to somebody you know tell you about it? How did you end up learning about that thing in the first place?
that was like, I'm sorry if I recall correctly
Yeah,
because it's been a while.
it's like 3 years now,
I
so I
think,
totally understand.
yeah. um, it actually it's one of the most common ways we come upon a topic, and that's that people, Japanese people, were reacting to it like intensively. So when the moment I see, like, I don't know, on X or whatever, people being like, "Whoa, what's this?" I also get like, "Whoa, what's this?" And then that I think that's most likely how I stumbled upon that silly little article. But yeah, so I don't know. It's like because you mentioned being curious about how we select basically articles, and it's, as I mentioned, Automaton West has this challenge of like having to offer things that people can't find elsewhere because we are like a small site, and if we just put out things that people can read on major websites, no one's going to read us. So one thing is that we are conscious of looking for information that's not not found elsewhere, that has some kind of value, whether it be entertaining, whether it be funny, whether it be weird or like profound. Like, it has to have some kind of value in this sense and be something that someone who likes Japan or Japanese games will like be, oh my god, I can't believe I stumbled upon this. Like, so that's kind of the thing we're going for in general. And like, for example, letting people in the West know what Japanese communities care about, what they're angry about, what they're like currently reacting to. That's one side of it.
You listed out like a bunch of different things that could make something interesting, like it being funny or it being profound or something like that, right? For the Bourbon Metaverse particular, what do you think that kind of fits into? Is that like a humorous thing to you, or how would you perceive the value of that article?
Yeah, I think if I stumbled upon that last week, there would be no chance of me making an article about it. Is the first thing I would like to say. Yeah, at the time it was like this kind of like little funny bit of trivia, like, look at what this weird thing this company is doing, because it's like yeah, like a corporation trying to be like, hey, is this the cool thing the kids are doing these days? Like, yeah. So yeah, that was kind of the angle it was introduced in, probably, if I remember correctly. But yeah, now, like Automaton, I'm not sure like since when you've been following this site, but you probably have noticed that things have been kind of changing with time, like what we prioritize. So now that kind of story would be kind of low on our priority list because there's a lot more relevant things to talk about, more impactful stories out there. So
I'm
yeah,
the right kind of weirdo for the Bourbon Metaverse, but I know there's not a lot of me. I will say the one thing that I found valuable in that article, and it did leave like a really big impression on me, I guess, or maybe I should say it worked its way in my brain, but I did not know that I got it from your writing. Um, at the end, you kind of have this paragraph that talks about like this may seem weird, but here are some Japanese company like values that make this make sense. So you're like, being, in line with the current trends of technology, right?
uh,
And then also providing a service to people and providing like a space. And like part of the Bourbon Metaverse, if I recall correctly, is like giving information about the area around their office building, basically, right? And so
yeah,
it's like
yeah.
almost like this community service kind of thing. And I think that was something that I read from you, and then in my brain that got stuck, and I went years thinking about this, I like these things, and then only recently realized, oh, you wrote it in that article. I wasn't the one who thought of it, so. But
Wow, that's yeah. I'm
yeah, so
happy to hear that. You're probably the only person who had such a profound experience from that article.
yes.
But yeah,
Well, I do want to ask you one question because that makes a lot of
yeah.
sense up front. Now, I don't know if you know this. The Bourbon Metaverse is not only still open, they still update it.
Oh,
I log into the Bourbon Metaverse every 6 months to check out what's going on. I've never seen a person on the Bourbon Metaverse since the original article. Do you have any idea why they would continue to update this? Because they've added like a museum. They have a whole museum they added in there where you can go learn about the
wow.
100-year of the company. They keep putting commercials in. You can get coupons from the metaverse, and I have to wonder who is still managing this and why. So,
Yeah, that's crazy. I had no idea.
yeah.
Uh, I could like investigate that like for a future article, honestly.
Well, it would make me happy, but I don't know. I don't know. I did joke with my friend the other day. I was like, "It's lasted longer than a lot of Square Enix live service games." So,
Honestly.
yeah. So, well, cool. Well, thank you for letting me like pick your brain about a very specific topic there.
Yeah,
That
you're
probably
welcome.
is only related to me. Um, in kind of that like localizing articles kind of sense. I know you said you're changing the style of content you're doing, but some of your articles they do seem to be like, you could correct me if I'm wrong, direct translations of, or not direct translations of articles somebody on the Japanese side wrote. I don't know if they're
Yeah.
just writing their own articles in English or if you guys are localizing those. What are those articles and how do those work exactly?
Okay, so basically, all the articles you see on the site, which are signed by a Japanese author, are written originally in Japanese by that author for the Japanese site, and then this is picked up by the Western editorial team, and we kind of translate, localize it. And we used to like write for each article that it's been localized by so and so, but it feels more organic to leave in just the original author's name now. So everything it's presented as if it's written originally in English, but it is in fact translated. So and yeah, originally I think it's even written so on our company's site, not on Automaton West, but like the company that owns Automaton West. I think it's still written that Automaton West is about translating the Japanese site, which was kind of its roots and is still a big part of it because Automaton Japan has super like valuable content, but it has the frequency at which we actually directly translate Japanese the articles from the Japanese site has like reduced quite a lot, mainly because, as I mentioned, Automaton Japan does a lot of Western gaming stuff, which isn't interesting for our readership. And also, some of the stuff they do about Japanese games is already picked by major Western publications. So obviously we can't get gain interest from that. So it has we have kind of like not been translating so much from the site, but we still do in terms of like there are some very super high value articles that the Automaton Japan site does. For example, recently they did a feature where they interviewed a bunch of engineers who have experience like working with the Nintendo Switch, and like asking them like what was difficult about that. So that's the kind of content we jump at to localize, because nobody else does that, and that's like really part of what makes Automaton West special, I think.
Does it help that, like, I assume the Japanese arm has these contacts in ways that, a Silicon Air might not have, right? Because you are there on site, have Japanese staff, right? Or maybe they're on site in country, maybe I should say. Do you feel like you have more connections than a lot of these kind of external or foreign outlets?
Yeah, well, I can't speak like,
Yeah.
as I've never been part of a Western outlet on the inside,
Mhm.
but I can say that the Automaton West is benefiting really like a lot from the fact that we have Automaton Japan behind our back, because Automaton Japan, first, it has a good reputation. It has, as you've mentioned, lots of contacts, and the thing when you're doing business with Japanese people, trust is so important. So if you are a new site, nobody, you're not gonna get them to open up to you, and you're not likely to be trusted. So the thing, since we have Automaton Japan to like guarantee for us, and we have Japanese people as contact persons for other Japanese people, uh, yeah, that's another important thing. The Japanese people, they feel a lot more comfortable when they can communicate with someone who's also like at least like native level Japanese. So, and they're much more likely to communicate frankly, and like for things to happen from there. So yeah, that's a big part, and I think we've managed, thanks to that connection, to like gain the trust and gain connections with the companies and developers, and we've had like very like positive feedback also from a lot of companies, because they feel uh, compared to when they're doing work with completely Western outlets, they have more control, in the sense that how things are translated. Like they get to check, and they say, well, this may be a bit like, change this. We didn't actually mean to say that, like, or something like. They can like have more say over like how they get represented in the end, and that gives them a lot of like reassurance. They feel more like I don't know, safe maybe, to trust us with their content. So
Yeah, I feel like the last few years there's been some fairly high profile stories of something getting translated and then there having to be like damage control around it because the way it was translated may not have come across right, right? So
yeah.
you kind of view yourself or your company as like an important role in making sure that comes across in a clean fashion. It sounds like.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big thing. So,
Mhm.
and it's also another reason I'm very like thankful for the working environment, because you can always ask someone next to you, "Hey, does this make sense?
Yeah.
Is this real or not?" Like, because Japanese can be ambiguous, and I think a lot of the stories that end up being like mistranslated or this, not all of them are like on purpose or malicious. I think a lot of these things are genuine accidents. But yeah, one of our big goals is like not to not to let that happen
Yeah.
on our turf. So
So I'm curious, is there any reverse situations there where, since you guys can speak English and things like that, are they translating works from your team? Are they looking for your perspectives on things at all from your background? Or
oh well, the Japanese editorial team, they're all they all have a good understanding of English.
yeah.
Sometimes they will consult with us um like nuances, like what does this mean, or
Mhm.
stuff like that. And yeah, that kind of communication is common. But I don't think actually, if there's been a case of like Automaton West exclusive article being translated to Japanese. I don't think that's ever happened.
Do you think there is, because like sometimes I feel like in the West there's a genuine interest from the user base of like what Japanese gamers think about. There used to be, I'm trying to remember what site it was. Maybe it was Silicon Air. There used to be some site that would literally just go and translate like threads of people talking or like reviews from Japan just
Yeah.
to get the different view. Do you feel like there's as much interest on the other side of that in terms of like are Japanese gamers curious about like what Westerners think as much?
Oh yeah, especially when it comes to like what Westerners think about Japanese games. Like I don't know, like oh yeah, I remember one. This was one idea I gave to the Japanese editorial team that they liked, and it ended up being quite popular. There was like a thing going on it on X, where people were like obsessing over how Japanese developers are able to optimize their games so well,
Mhm.
um, and like just making memes of it and comparisons to Western games. So um, the Japanese side picked that up, and it was like really popular. I guess in that sense, like it's the things gamers want to hear is kind of the same. So that was interesting to see.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting because in some ways, like because of the language barrier, I think there's like a bigger gap between the US and like European countries and things like that sometimes because I feel like there's so much more English in those spaces. So it's like
Yeah,
what I like is when I don't know how you feel about this. Sometimes games get kind of hit really hard in the US and I feel like it's because there's this very um large amount of group thinking happening around a game. I don't know if you're familiar with like the Western coverage of Babylon's Fall and how that
oh
was received. And sometimes I think it's interesting to go look at like Japanese reviews because I feel like I don't want to say it seems like they're more forgiving on games, but it feels like that they're not in the same mind space of like what is in the zeitgeist of news in the
yeah.
West. Um, so I think that's like something that's interesting. I'm sure there's plenty of Japanese games that people like get upset at within Japan, but it's nice to get like that separation from the culture in some ways.
Yeah,
So
that's definitely like the Japanese internet space. It has its own little dramas and its discourses and stuff. But you're definitely right when you say that it's kind of you don't get not everything belongs to the same kind of fixed discourse that happens among in English speaking spaces. So yeah, that's also like a big reason why I think what we're doing is valuable because when you for example, if you translate what a certain Japanese creator is saying on a certain topic,
mhm,
it gives you not only like insights from a person from Japan, from a Japanese creator, from an individual. It also gives you insight from someone who is completely from speaking from a different position, from a different context, and like giving you something like something that completely breaks free from all the like recycled discourse you've been hearing in the internet spaces. So yeah, that's a big part of it.
I am kind of curious because in the West, sometimes like I think something that you've covered a lot on your website is this idea, or maybe it's like what companies are saying, where it's like expanding overseas and like the anime and game industry seems to be a core business goal right now. Is that accurate? I feel like I've read that on your website before. Oh,
Yeah, as far as the Japanese government goes, yeah, that's kind of their goal.
gotcha,
They're
gotcha,
they're putting a lot of hope into that industry.
gotcha. One of the narratives that have kind of developed over here in the West is this idea that Japanese companies are starting to make changes to their games to meet Western sensibilities, like how do we view sexual content and things like that, right? Or what is our cultural views and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
I don't it's one of those things that it's really hard to know how true that really is or isn't. The answer is probably somewhere in between. But as somebody who is having to like localize these articles, um, or choose what to talk about from the Japanese side, are you having to make decisions of like, oh, this might not land well with our audience, so maybe I won't cover this story. Maybe the way I cover it's going to be a little bit different than normal.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I think that's important to like keep in mind is that when we talk about Japanese companies doing this or that, we have to understand that there's a bunch of different companies with
Yes.
different philosophies who are all doing their own thing based on their own set of values, which can or do not have to have anything to do with what's happening on the West and what's being expected of them. So that's one thing. Like, people tend to like treat Japanese games as like one like set kind of life form,
Yeah.
but it's like a bunch of creators who have their own thoughts and their own approaches to things. So
I will say the
yeah, that
stereotype of Japan is that it's like this big monoculture, which obviously is not true, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
they're like everyone's kind of the same, and then you go to Japan and like it's like, oh, Japanese people are rule followers. Then you just see somebody just break the rules in front of you, and it's like, oh, clearly not, right? It's like a myth in some ways that develops, right? That like we can sum up Japanese gamers and Japanese companies as one thing, right? So
yeah. And as far as like, do I like cover something or decide not to cover it based on whether people will be angry? Well, um, I I in that context, I do remember covering a lecture a certain company held, where they talked about certain ways they're aiming to incorporate um, inclusivity into their, like, not just the actual games but in their workspace as well. And yeah, I remember just like kind of translating some of what was said there and like summarizing like what the main points were without any like personal opinions from me, obviously, because like, yeah, why wouldn't that be something that people know should know about, like.
yeah.
So yeah, I think seeing, since we also, whenever some Japanese creator or company talks about the uniqueness of Japanese games and wanting to preserve that, we report on that as well. And obviously, people love when they hear that. People who love Japanese games love to hear that because they want their Japanese stuff to stay
Yeah.
Japanese, whatever that means. Um, but yeah, um, and also, so yeah, we kind of try to be fair when it comes
Mhm.
to that and just show like what different people are doing. Like, we're not trying to say Japan is like acting like this towards, when it comes to this issue, Japan thinks like that. You can't say that, obviously. So we're just introducing what various companies, various creators think on the topic.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I feel like when you guys have covered sexual content, it feels very like I don't know how to put it. It feels informative generally overall. Like you guys are doing Venus vacation articles and things like that, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
so it seems like you guys generally have handled it. Sometimes like there are some Western publications that I think get a little weird about stuff, but at the same time, I think that's like everything else. You can't really summarize Western publications in one word as well. So it's kind of an interesting I think it's interesting to read how everybody presents those articles because sometimes you'll read a website that's like talking about Venus vacation and they're talking about the same story, but they're talking about it in very different ways, right?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I
So
think I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, actually, like the Automaton Japan as well as Automaton West, both, I from what I've seen so far, like both sides are very like open to like writing about sexy games.
Mhm.
Of course, nothing explicit, nothing vulgar,
Yeah.
but like, why not just speak about that as another part of gaming? Like that, it. We don't have any aversions to that. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think we're kind of neutral in that sense.
One thing I did want to ask you about, I don't I don't really read Automaton Japan that much. So I don't know if they
Yeah.
do this kind of coverage, but when I go to other websites like 4Gamer and things like that, I noticed that like crypto and NFT games still seem to persist in a way that they haven't really continued to exist in a lot of Western gaming coverage. I
Yeah.
feel like I don't see a lot of that on your West side. Am I misreading that, like, for some reason, Japan has, like, this ongoing interest in that space for some reason? And, like,
Um.
yeah, I don't really know. Sometimes I look at websites, but I know I'm looking at, like, a handful of websites, so it might just be the few websites I'm reading continue to cover that stuff. Um,
Yeah.
so And just to be clear,
I have
I'm very
seen,
neutral on that stuff. I'm not here
yeah,
trying to say anything just because I don't want to sit there and claim that like I know anything about that business in any meaningful way,
yeah.
right? So,
I have to say, obviously, I'll preface this by saying that I am also not very knowledgeable about that
mhm,
side of things. So I don't think I can say like definitely, yeah, that side of the industry is very active or not.
mhm,
But I will say that I share kind of the same impressions as you, especially when reading other Japanese gaming outlets. There are a lot, especially like venture companies doing NFT and crypto, like game kind of hybrid game projects.
mhm.
And yeah, that seems to be kind of continuing. Um, and yeah, the West, our Japanese side doesn't really cover that a lot because there's not much of a demand. And yeah, the Western side also,
Yeah.
we kind of didn't really identify this as something that would be interesting to our readers. So
Yeah. One thing that I think has been really interesting to me, and I assume other people because you keep covering it, is you guys have really gotten into like financial information for companies. I think
oh
Koei
yeah,
Tecmo,
yeah.
you guys talk about all the time. I love that kind of stuff. I want to know all about like, what are they saying and like, the weird investment stuff they have going on. Is that something fueled by a personal interest of yours, or are you kind of just delivering something that you feel like your audience has wanted?
Both, because as you just mentioned, like the stuff about Koi's investments, like I can't get enough of that stuff, and I also love to dig into it and read and write about it. So yeah, that side of it is personal, but also um, the I think there was like a big gap there to fulfill in terms of relaying financial information about Japanese companies. Obviously, there are other sites covering it, but I think there was it's something that people are interested in, and something that people consistently read a lot, like based on the numbers we're getting. So yeah, I think there's definitely a demand, and it's something people are interested to see. So we started it kind of. I remember the first few articles, like financial news we put out. It was like experimental to
Mhm.
see like testing the waters, are there people who would be interested in that? And yeah, it turned out that it's something people want to know about. So I think it's another like unique source of information.
When you guys are reporting on that stuff, do you feel like you're more of like a pass through of like, hey, they reported this and we're just going to kind of like tell it how it is? Or do you feel like do you have like any expertise on your guys' side that helps kind of evaluate like, okay, is this thing they're saying lining up or anything like that?
Basically, we try to stay in our league and not like read into things that
Hmm.
aren't written and not report on anything that's not explicitly stated.
Hmm.
So most of the financial news we do is reporting on either what the company has put out as official information, or if there is a certain, I think on a few occasions we have quoted analysts from securities companies, what their thoughts about a certain company's performance. But other than that, we don't put our own voices
Yeah.
there or our own like input, because there is not we don't have a level of expertise that would be required for that.
Yeah. I also feel like, and I could be wrong about this, I feel like probably most people reading these articles from you are people like me who are just like interested, not so much like I'm gonna go like make a financial investment in Koei Tecmo because of this.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, but yeah, I feel like that you're probably dealing with fairly low stakes overall, and ultimately the numbers is kind of what matters. I think the thing that's interested me about Japan is I feel like there's been a lot of talk recently. I think Koei Tecmo specifically had talked about this, like the idea that like the mobile game market has like reached its maturity and the growth is going to be in the console space kind of thing. Which I feel like in the
yeah,
West we're having an opposite conversation where like the console space seems matured and they're still trying to find other spaces like mobile to grow, right? So I think it's
yeah.
an interesting flip flop between regions that I have noticed at least. So
Yeah, yeah, I mean, in Japanese spaces, the obviously opinions are kind of like quite diverse on the
mhm.
topic, but there are a lot of like developers who think that the future will have like talent that was previously devoted to mobile games streaming into the console game market.
Yeah.
That's one opinion that's out there, but yeah.
When it comes to the people who work on games, that you're interacting with, how are you guys doing that right now? Is that typically you're meeting them through, like, in-person events, or are you, reaching out through the Japanese arm? Like, how are you making those contacts, you feel like, if you're okay to talk about that?
Yeah, most of the contact and communication with the companies goes through is conducted by the Japanese side
Mm,
of so there is very little like direct communication with them except for like real life events and stuff. So yeah, the Japanese site does a big plays a big role in that.
for the in-person events, is that something that you've been able to participate in much, or is that more of outside your realm?
Yeah, I have, but like in very limited
Yeah.
occasions.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's not something we've managed to like develop really far yet.
Gotcha. Is that something that you would like to do more often, or
I mean, yeah, it's definitely a possibility, especially I think on last year's Tokyo Game Show, we did the first interview that was conducted like only by Automaton West, which is not
Mm,
like translated from Automaton Japan. So yeah.
yeah. When you're talking with developers, in the few cases that you've had the chance, it sounds like, what do you feel like is kinda your role in that situation? Because you mentioned earlier about, like, making sure that when an article gets translated, they're being represented correctly. Um, I feel like in the West, there's a hard time knowing what exactly somebody's role is in the game industry. Some people view themselves as more like a combative kind of stance against publishers, like, "I'm out for the consumer," right, to make sure they're fine. Um, but I feel like in your role specifically, it seems more of a, I don't know if like a I guess how would you classify yourself? Do you classify yourself as like a journalist, or do you kind of feel like you're kind of in like the enthusiast press or critic kind of thing? Like how would you define yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think well, we're still in a bit of an identity crisis when it
Yeah.
comes to that. But I think the main point of Automaton West and what we're trying to do is like report on things that we think people will find interesting and let
Mhm,
them think like have their opinions about that. Um, and obviously, like we make sure to, which is kind of rare in among Japanese gaming press. We also talk about negative things, things that are maybe news that maybe is disadvantageous to companies, to developers, because
mhm,
so in that case, in that sense, we do have the sense that we're doing journalism because we do talk about things that maybe companies don't want being talked about.
mhm.
And we do receive complaints sometimes for the things we write, but that is one thing that we think is important and we kind of want to keep doing other than that fun stuff. Like
Is that specifically as the Western side, or is that the company as a whole that you feel like has a little bit of a combative nature when needed? I guess. So.
yeah, like the Japanese side is also like they are known they are like I think they allow themselves to be critical in a way
Mhm,
that's needed, that in a way that like gamers want.
mhm.
So yeah, like just rational, logical kind of like relaying things that points that require criticism or negative stories that are meaningful to cover.
Yeah. I know as like editor in chief, you probably have like a broad range of things that you're doing, right? Um, but I'm curious, what would you say is like your uh the thing that you value most about your position right now? Like what are things you enjoy doing most right now?
And in terms of what I enjoy, I think, well, when I first came here and like was entrusted with being like editor in chief, I was told that I can like direct things free, like to my taste.
Mhm.
Basically, they told me make the site you want this to be. So I didn't take that like too literally because I wanted to respect what was already there and like follow what I felt that the Japanese side wanted to do with the site. But I do like that side of like getting to like do content curation and just directing like the overall direct like what the site will choose to cover and kind of what kind of impression we will give outwards to our readers.
And a lot of that is like through the trial and error process, basically, of just,
Yes.
try something and, and see the response, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're doing that process, like, how would you categorize? I guess, like, are you making those decisions based off topic or the type of content, or is it a combination of those two? Like, when you think about here's something we're going to try that's new, um, if that makes sense.
You mean like how we decide if something is worth pursuing in the future or not?
Yeah, like if you see something that is not what you typically cover, how do you make the decision of like, okay, let's try this?
Well, if it's something like potentially like maybe I don't know dangerous or like sensitive, but this will include. I would definitely consult with like the Japanese editorial team.
Mhm.
If it's something completely like neutral, but simply we have not done it yet, I would evaluate it based on like does it is it something I would want to read? Like that's I think that's the biggest question. Would I even like think this is relevant if I stumbled upon it on my feed? Like so that's one part that goes into it.
You've mentioned being on X a lot and things like that. How important do you feel like is social media to your job? Um, because it sounds like that is in some ways a lot of the source of information too. Um, like because you're talking about like internet culture trends, right? So being on social
Yeah.
media seems important. Do you have like feeds that you've curated, or do you just have your own feed? And you're just like, I'm just going through this to see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, as a person whose job is information,
Mhm,
it's very important to have like a constant and very high volume input of like what's going on. And so there is it's important to have like a not only your own feed but uh, and for example like I don't know sites that you always visit, but to also like keep your antennas like honed on new things and kind of like expanding
mhm.
what internet spaces, what accounts, what I don't know, what communities you're like keeping track with. So yeah, it is a big part of doing this work, um, especially in the sense of like not directly using post on X as material, but as a way to sniff out what people care about, I guess. That I think that's like an important use of it.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's like it can bring up interesting perspectives, right? I think you heard an article, or I'm not sure about you specifically, but on the website there's an article about like the I don't know if ethics is the right word of modifying Dragon Quest to make it
Oh
better or
yeah.
something. And there was like a group of people, which I think that at the end of the day, I think the post had like maybe like 1,000 or 2,000 retweets or something. So it's like it's not necessarily like this is like you said earlier, not representative of everyone, right? But it's an interesting perspective and seeing like the logic that somebody goes through kind of thing, even if it isn't like the largest kind of perspective out there. It's still an interesting one to
Yeah,
look at.
I also remember that article very clearly because it was one of those articles we got kind of some anger because like people sometimes they often accuse us of like making a story out of two tweets, which is a criticism we receive often. So
Mm,
and in the case of like the Dragon Quest mods, I remember the Japanese editorial team like suggesting that topic because oh, this is something like you could introduce like as a perspective some people have, and also in the article we are always like making our best effort to make it clear that we're not trying to speak on behalf of everyone. But yeah, it does it when it's something polarizing, people will kind of react with badly, maybe,
Yeah.
or take like have like a bad faith interpretation of it. So yeah, that is one risk that comes with it.
Well, I think to some extent, I could be wrong, but like I feel like a lot of people view things really black and white sometimes. So it's like
Yeah.
either everybody has to have this opinion or nobody can. You can't include it in the thread. I think at the end of the day, I'd have to go back and look at the wording, but I think it was an interesting point of view. But yeah, I would not interpret the article as like this is what a broad swath of Japanese audience are saying, or at least the evidence isn't quite there. But I think it's an
Yeah.
interesting point, right? So I don't think it's I don't know, don't feel too bad about it, I guess is what I'm saying. So
No, that's the part where I'm thankful that I have like actual like Japanese gamers next to me who can tell
mhm.
me if something is being blown out of proportion, or just if it's like a non-story,
Yeah.
or if it is actually a relevant part of discourse that comes up.
How much of your tips comes from other people in the Japanese community, whether it be an email they sent you or even just coworkers? Do you feel like is it like a majority or just kind of like a nice thing on top of you doing your own research?
From the community, very little, or like close to none.
Mhm.
But Japanese editorial team is very helpful in giving us tips and like digging up things that none of us on the Western side would be able to. So yeah, and that's a big part of it too.
Not so much the managerial side, but does the Japanese staff seem invested in the Western branch's success overall? Do you feel like? Does it feel supportive? I guess.
Yeah, we have like quite big expectations
Mm,
placed on our shoulders, because it is like Automaton is like trying to expand in various ways. We also have a video business, like, and then there's the English branch, and these are all things that are um, kind of expected to help the whole brand grow. So yeah, um, and having as a as a media headquartered in Japan, having an English site with authority, with a good reputation, is something that's like really important.
mm,
So yeah, they are quite invested in seeing Automaton West grow and contributing to it as well.
yeah. Did because obviously there's more than just two languages, but do they show any interest in like expanding beyond English and Japanese? Or I'm sure if the opportunity was there, they would take it, but I don't know if that's ever been something that you have discussed. Because you
Yeah,
mentioned
it's
you're from
not
Serbia, right? So I'm not sure.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm a dumb American. I don't know what language is spoken in Serbia, but
No, there are not nearly enough people speaking Serbian for us to attempt to localize. But yeah,
yeah,
so far it's been like mostly like English and Japanese content. Yeah,
gotcha, gotcha. You mentioned that you were kind of doing like non-gaming work before joining uh, Automaton.
yeah,
I think do you feel like I'm trying to think of the question I'm trying to ask. You mentioned that you haven't worked in Western outlets before, right? We know that much. That
yeah.
is you've established. Um, are you familiar with kind of like were you reading those websites in the past, and like do you feel familiar with enough about like what's going on in Western journalism to like have an idea at least of like what it is, or do you feel like you just haven't looked at it all, don't really care, I'm here doing my job in Japan basically?
No, no, it's definitely like obviously before I was working as a part of the whole thing, I was like as a person who plays game themselves, I was like had a reasonable amount of contact with Western publications.
Mhm.
But since I've become like involved in it, it's also become part of my job to be informed and to like keep up with what both sides are doing. So yeah, I think that's definitely one thing.
So in trying to ask that question, I think the lead in I was trying to get to was, coming from a space that's outside of games press, this being, it sounds like your first real professional job in games press.
Yeah.
Like overall, have you been really happy with your career in games so far? Has it been like met your expectations from when you were like first applying to this position, right?
Yeah, it's well, it's come with a lot of surprises, obviously, because I remember like being very surprised by. I always knew that like people were distrustful of media, which they should be, obviously, but I never knew like before I was on like the inside of things to what extent that goes.
Hmm.
So that was a big surprise and something I was not at all equipped to like handle or like make like countermeasures against.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been like everything has been like a learning experience so far,
Hmm.
but with the support of like the Japanese editorial team, uh, that has made like getting accustomed a lot easier, and I've learned a lot from them directly. So yeah, it's so far. I mean, it has been quite fulfilling.
When it comes to your like personal fulfillment in the job, I I don't know how true this is of Japanese media. I kind of feel you mentioned earlier that people being distrustful of like press and things like that. I feel like a lot of Western outlets get a lot of flack for people who don't really get paid that much to write about games. It's like, oh, you're just here to like, you're getting like, money or whatever. And it's like, this person gets like barely a salary. You don't need to talk about your salary, but I'm curious, when you're working in this space, I feel like you're probably doing it for more than just a paycheck, right? What do you hope that people get out of your work the most when they're reading it?
Well, I think that like since our whole thing is like conveying insights about Japanese games and about Japanese creators that people normally wouldn't have access to,
Hmm.
I hope that that would be um I hope that like Automaton West could be a source where people could get kind of a nuanced kind of source of information that they can't get elsewhere, because I think I've seen often happening um, with the information coming from Japan, which I think is a bit of a shame, is like, for example, if a Japanese creator makes a statement on a certain topic, it can very often get kind of very simplified and classified as belonging into some already existing discourse in the English speaking sphere. And then it
Hmm.
kind of gets stripped of its original context and nuance. So I want Automaton West to be a place where people who don't want that to happen to find like a like authentic, should I call it authentic information,
Yeah.
and like to not to be able to like not uh have to view everything from a kind of set frames that exist in the English speaking world, I guess.
Yeah. And what would you say have been the biggest challenges to like achieving that for you?
Getting people to engage with what you've written. If I might, like, for example, one thing I've noticed is that this is also related to my lack of experience in the industry. Is like if you leave even a little bit of like room to be misunderstood, you will be misunderstood in a bad way. So yeah, making sure that your writing is like foolproof and doesn't like leave any space for people to assume bad intentions is one thing. Automaton has unfortunately struggled a lot with like this kind of distrust, and that's another thing I misunderstood. I thought that if you have a site which is not known, which does not have reputation, I thought that this meant that you have a clean slate. But this
Mhm.
was not wrong, because when people see a site which doesn't have a name, but there's suddenly like viral articles coming out from it, being shared on Reddit and God knows where. People assume that there's something suspicious going on. So yeah, that has been kind of a challenge, and something we're working on as much as we can on our side, because a name is not something you can just make out of thin air.
Establishing trust is
Yeah.
incredibly hard, but to some people it comes incredibly naturally. And if you can't do it, it's very frustrating, right? Because it's just like, I'm here being as honest as possible, and people are just taking me the wrong way because, I can't figure out how to message this right. We were
Yeah.
talking about crypto and NFT stuff earlier, and I think the Japanese coverage of it is fascinating, but that is not me supporting those things.
Mm,
And like trying to draw that line with people is like a really challenging thing, because if you start
yeah.
talking about it and like to even consider the idea of what these people are trying to do, right? It's challenging because they just want to not even like consider it in the first place, right? But I think it is important because like sometimes I'll see some websites report like like Hajime Tabata, the Final Fantasy 15 guy. Um,
Yeah.
he's running a company that's like pretty heavily invested in a lot of technology in that space kind of thing, and people will like take quotes for him about like crypto being the future without talking about his investment in this company. I'm like, well, it's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
important to know that, right? And I think you guys have generally done a good job of like, if there is something relevant to that, you'll link to it, right? Like I think I can't remember the name of the company, but there's like one of the Final Fantasy mobile games, one of those companies really started getting into like NFT games and stuff. And I think you were talking about their
Oh,
financials, and they
yeah.
were succeeding in that regard. And I think you
Is it Gumi, perhaps?
Gumi, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah,
Yes.
so I do appreciate that, even if it's like, hey, I don't know really anything about this, that you're willing to say like, hey, they said this in their financial report, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just try to like shut it down and be like, we don't even want to include this in the article because I think it can leave out important information sometimes, right? So
Yeah. That's that we try. Thank you.
yeah. um, when you look at the future of uh automaton sorry automaton media, what do you think is something that you would like to be able to do more of?
Definitely more. I think a big, like the one of the most valuable like types of content we have so far is like our developer interviews,
Hmm.
which I think when I compare to, since there's obviously Western sites also doing interviews with Japanese creators, but I think that we are able to like achieve a level of frankness and that maybe is not seen so much on other sites.
Hmm.
And that is like one thing that that makes us, I think, stand out. So that's definitely one thing that we really want to value, like, going forward. And then other than that is just keeping like in touch with what people care about,
Hmm.
and refining our how we pick up our content, as we have so far. Like, we've made it from the Bourbon Metaverse to what we're doing now. So
I didn't come into this episode thinking the concept of trust would be a big theme of it. However, it makes sense, right? I mean, at the end of the day, information distribution, the backbone of it is built on trust. We won't trust information if we don't trust the person who's telling it to us. And why we trust somebody, I think, is often like a lot of things that are ambiguous. But if I just like sum up, the three things that I would say are big parts of this is, one is being able to communicate effectively. Two is being able to kind of, in the case of Japanese content and like wanting to know what's happening overseas, showing somebody who's able to like navigate those cultural norms. And then also, I think somebody who's willing to show people dignity and respect to other people as human beings, right? That they're genuinely interested in informing you about something, and they're not necessarily there manipulating you for personal gain, right? I think what you see with Automaton is they have that for industry insiders, right? For game developers, right? They can go to talk to people in the industry and understand that, hey, I'm going to be represented in a way I want to. There's a cultural understanding here. There's a language understanding here that's not going to cause issues, right? And when it comes to being a journalist, I think part of that is you have to play both sides, right? You need the trust of the people on the other side you're talking to talk to you. And then also you need the trust of your readers to make sure that, they are understanding that you're also there to inform them ultimately at the end of the day. But when it comes to readers, I think it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of repetition of seeing an outlet to remember them, basically. And I think that's really challenging today in the kind of like attention economy, as it gets called a lot, where the competition for your trust is very high. Your trust, unfortunately, is very profitable to a lot of people, right? And I think we are at a point now where we have a lot of these systems in place that help a lot of larger scale organizations, or maybe people who just kind of touch and feel it out. They have an understanding of what is the fastest way to get your trust, even if that trust that they're building with you is not necessarily deserved, right? I feel like, this is just me personally, so obviously I wouldn't have brought Amber on unless I trusted them, but, Automaton Media to me feels a lot more ground level. I don't know if you have a editor-in-chief with a lifelong Toho fandom, background that doesn't have a genuine interest and appreciation for sharing these things to people. And some extent, I think you do have to kind of play within that space of like, what do people want? What does your audience want? But I do think so far, I have seen a genuine respect for, what people are doing in this industry and what they're creating, and I think that's been one of their strengths. I really hope that it does result in them, being able to build a website, further that reaches more people. So if you haven't, please go check out their website. I'll have a link in the description, but also, you can Google just Automaton West and you'll get to them. And if you know people who love that kind of content, personally, I highly recommend or highly suggest their website. I think they're a great site. Go check it out. Go check out Amber. Give Amber your trust. I'll vouch on that for now. With my 1.5 hour conversations with her, that is my feeling, is that Amber feels like someone you can trust. Anyways. Also, I think it's worth mentioning, this is the 1-year anniversary of Hot Pot Gaming. So thank you so much for everyone for listening. And thank you so much to all the guests for people like Amber who, are giving their time to come on and, teach me about, what their expertise is, and also hopefully teach you about something new that you're not, familiar with, or help you think about, a lot of these topics in some different ways.